You had a near-death experience when you were 10 years old. Will you tell me how this came about? Yes, it was my father's birthday, and my aunt and uncle had invited us to go skiing. So my younger sister and I went along skiing with my parents and my younger brother. We went up the mountain by the ski lift and then skied down. And on the last downhill run that evening, where there was a slope with ski jumps that had been set up earlier that year, and the last section there was in fact a bit steep. We learned from our uncle how to side slip with the skis in such a situation. So since it was a downhill slope, there were also lots of other people who wanted to ski down this slope as quickly as possible. And so one of the skiers shot out from nowhere, probably intending to get to the side of the slope because he may have thought that he could avoid crashing into someone further down. But he didn't even bother to check beforehand whether there were any skiers further down in front of him. So he then crashed into our group of 4 and hit me with his skis from behind on the left side of my body, thereby knocking me down, and his ski pole hit my head. And with the remaining speed, he then was sliding sideways past me, crashing into my aunt's knees, so that they were, in fact, shattered. So he simply had torn down all of us, and luckily my uncle was a Samaritan and noticed that I was no longer breathing. So he immediately gave first aid by resuscitating me. And if it hadn't been for him, I would no longer be in this world. Tell me, this skier mowed you down, and as a result, you became unconscious? What did you experience during this situation of near death? Well, the last thing I was aware of was that I was skiing and wanted to learn sliding down sideways, side slipping. And then the next moment, I felt a kind of blow or suction, something that pulled me out of my body. I didn't know what was happening to me. It was dark, and initially I couldn't see anything either. And it all happened so quickly. And then there was really a moment where I thought, oh, now I'm ascending. I saw the people down there, and I also saw myself lying down there. I saw my uncle who took care of me, but for me, all that was so, I was just so uninvolved because I wasn't in my body. I was just watching it all. Then more and more people came who wanted to help me. But I very quickly had freed myself also from this impression, and since it all happened a long time ago, I can no longer describe all the details about it. But what remained impressive for me was that a film of my life was demonstrated to me, and I still remember experiences I had had when I was 6 months old. And so I can still today even tell you things from my early childhood, when I was often asked, how do you know this? And I'm convinced that the remembrance of those early childhood incidents through this film helped me to recollect them also later on. This film then ended quite quickly because, at age 10, you haven't experienced that much yet. But I had seen some very impressive things, too. And then it came about that I was moving further and further away from the scene. I saw a tunnel. It was just something round where I saw light at the end. And it then drew me to this light. And I got there very quickly, and the closer I got, the more I felt an incredible warmth, a love, a shelteredness, just so really beautiful. That was wonderful, really so impressive. So I wanted to go there straight away. And I was already on my way to go deeper and deeper into this light. Initially, this was like a kind of glaring light, where you couldn't see what might be behind it. And the closer I got to the light, the better I could see a kind of path where I could have continued moving. But then the light was not as glaring as before. Now it consisted of some very fine colors, such as a fine pink shimmer. These were not the colors of a rainbow, but all the fine colors at once were present in this light. And that's where I wanted to enter. And suddenly I heard a voice saying, "Erika, it is not your time yet. You have to go back." But I intended to stay there. I still remember that I didn't agree, but I was repeatedly given to understand that unfortunately my time had not yet come and that I had to go back. And the next thing I was aware of was that I opened my eyes and that I was back in my body at the scene of the accident. I saw many people around me and I wanted to get up. Later I was told that 3 men had to hold me down on the ground because I was fighting to get up, simply because of this new strength. And I knew, now I'm back and then I'll be fine again and nothing will happen to me. I felt it that way because I really didn't feel the body yet. It was only the awareness of being here, and I had to be held to the ground. I was then told that I had had an accident and that I would probably be in a state of shock, whereupon my consciousness drifted a bit away again. And the next thing I remember, I was on the way to the hospital. I was brought to the local hospital, and the only thing I still know about that is that the bed linen in the ambulance was red and white. And looking at it for a while, I couldn't believe that I was in an ambulance. It just felt so unreal for me. And I asked myself, what are they doing to me? It was really quite strange for me. In the hospital, they found that I had severe internal injuries. I had ruptured my spleen and had a bruised kidney. And due to the blow to the head, I suffered a severe concussion. And so I had to be brought to the Lucerne Children's Hospital as quickly as possible. In the Children's Hospital, I recovered quite quickly. However, first it was said that my spleen had to be removed. And there was always this voice with me saying, "Erika, don't be afraid. The spleen does not have to be removed. You're okay." But for 5 days, I was in intensive care, where I wanted to get out of bed, and this again and again, so it was they almost had to tie me to the bed because I was too restless. But there were just so many spirits of life, so I also laughed a lot in the hospital, and I was happy. Going back to the near-death experience, did you recognize this voice? It was a woman's voice. I was familiar with it, but I don't know who it was. But it was like a loving mother's voice. How were you able to cope with this near-death experience emotionally? Step by step, though not so good at first, because initially I wasn't even aware of what had happened to me. There had been so many things going on in my spirit's eye that had nothing to do with everyday reality. I quickly realized that I couldn't talk to anyone about it, so I really pushed it away from me. And when I brought up the topic, which I did a couple of times, it was made clear to me this was a dream or that it was caused by the shock due to the accident. But the traumatic processing only came much later. When I was 14, a pastor once told a religion class about the near-death experience he had while almost drowning in a lake. And on this occasion, I was for the first time really shocked, realizing that I was not alone and that there are people who also have had similar experiences. And he described it in a way similar to how I had experienced it, this getting out of the body, and also that the memory of the whole life is also being demonstrated like a film, that there was a moment of darkness gradually leading up to the light. And he too had heard a voice saying to him, "It's not time for you yet." Whereupon I was then finally able to make peace with this moment, because as a child I was often angry, not knowing why, until I actually understood that this anger could also have something to do with the fact that I couldn't accept that I was here again, not yet understanding that this was also a gift. Erika, have you had any other spiritual experiences in your life? Yes, again and again. So I also was seriously ill several times. This circumstance enabling me to listen more to my inner voice, thus able to inquire whether something was necessary or not. For example, I have a tumor on my neck that was found to be cancerous. And in this regard, the voice told me, "No, you don't have to be afraid." Whereupon I refused to have my thyroid removed because there was trust in me and my healing power, and also in the divine being at work in us, resonating in us. And this helped me to find the way. And that happened almost 10 years ago now. And I still feel very well. I am still in good health. And thereafter, I even did a yoga teacher training in India. And then I figured out very quickly where to feel at home, namely that there are also possibilities to live the spiritual next to everyday life. And I was allowed to accompany my father 2 years ago when he was dying. He had dementia. Actually, I'm very happy that my near-death experience helps me to accompany other people in death or in the transition. And he often asked me, "What is it like when I go? Will you come with me?" To which I answered, "No, I cannot, but I can accompany you." And the 3 days before he actually died, he started to reach into the void. So I noticed that at times he was already in the other world. And I said to him, "Father, the time has come. I have promised you that I can accompany you this far, but you will do the rest yourself, and you can calm down." And with my spiritual eye, I also saw his parents, who were waiting for him and were present for him. And the more I then accompanied him, together with my siblings and my mother, the more I experienced an increasing premonition that more and more ancestors and spiritual beings were waiting for him, preparing to welcome him. And this was something very special to have insight into. There were some kind of voices also saying, Moritz is coming, Moritz is on his way. And shortly before his death, on the day of his transition, I heard a voice in the morning saying to me, today at 10 minutes past 10 o'clock in the evening, he will leave. Whereupon I was a bit restless, and I didn't really know how to mentally classify this either. But I also had confidence that it would be good as it should be. On that day, all my siblings, my mother and I were with him. And at 10 o'clock in the evening, my mother got nervous, saying that she had to go home now, because now she simply had forgotten her pills. So I asked her, are you really sure you want to leave now? Because I knew that my father was now about to make his transition. And she replied, yes, I want to leave. It's okay now. So she said goodbye to him, and I saw a beam of light inside the room with a huge path that was decorated with colors, flowers, where lots of spiritual beings were lined up and jubilant that he was now coming. And the light that I saw in my near-death experience was there too. And shortly after we had left, the phone call came through notifying us that he had made the transition. Could it be possible that this near-death experience somehow deepened your spiritual sensitivity? Yes, indeed. But what I myself noticed, too, is that even though I could move far away spiritually into the spiritual world, I am rooted, anchored in a body, and that therefore it is also very important to come back to earth, to root oneself in the earth again and again, even though the spiritual is also present, but that the earthly and the spiritual are to be brought into interaction with one another again and again, because here and now my soul's home is my body. And one important thing about this is promoting harmony and balance between the earthly and the spiritual again and again. Sometimes it's easier for me, but sometimes it's also hard for me. Looking back, what impact did this near-death experience have on your life? It had an impact on everything. My whole life, my perceptions became different. The first impressive experience that I was able to make again and again after this near-death experience was my intense bond to animals. The fact that I was able to communicate with them, also with plants. So nature is very, very important to me. And as for people, they frightened me when I was a child, because being a child, you have a certain lightheartedness. Therefore, you initially don't realize that you are sometimes not understood in what you as a child have experienced, or that not everyone can handle it. And then it often happened to me that I said things to people that were surely true, but that people couldn't handle. Are you still afraid of death? No, in no way, because now I really know that a near-death experience, as beautiful as I experienced it there, can really guide us to a fine place of shelteredness. But we also should understand that it's all about the life experience of the moment, because it's here and now where we can gain our experiences, and that's what's so important as well. And that neither one is more valuable than the other. And as for the fear of dying, no, I no longer fear death. Erika, thank you very much for the interview. You are so welcome.